Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast UnSpun, episode number 98. Boy, it's been a long break. It's been a couple of weeks off. That flu bug going around was one wicked one.
Drag
I
and
got it
drop.
bad up in my
It's perfect.
sinuses and
Hi, I'm
just wicked nasty. Sorry about that. I just forgot to mute my browser again. But you know, wow, that cold. It got up in my sinuses for like 2 weeks. I couldn't get that thing out, man. And people were sending me all of this advice and stuff to do. I tried everything that people sent. Pretty much the only thing that worked was like tons of ginger and salt water. That seemed to help give me a little edge on it, but it was terrible. And last week on Tuesday, it was a week into it. I still felt just as crappy as I did the first week, but feeling a lot better now. And thanks everybody for supporting the show during the break. And happy holidays, happy new year. Our first episode for 2018, January 2nd. And, so I really appreciate all of the support and everything over the holidays. I hope everyone had a great time. Jacob, he's back with us tonight. How are you tonight, Jacob?
I'm doing well. I'm haven't had that flu bug quite yet, so hopefully I can hold out and let it just pass on by.
Yeah, wow. Well, I spoke to some friends that also got it for 2 weeks, and I heard from some other people that got it for 3 weeks. But, I went through 2 bottles of vitamin C and a whole everything I could, imagine I could, was trying and doing, and I just couldn't get this thing out of the system there. So, oh man. So, well, you've got a lot in store for us, so we should probably cut to it. And, before we get going, please support the show. Gnosticmedia.com is the website. Also, please support Jacob's research. I know some people are helping you with the some of your book orders and things like that for the research. So thanks for that, and make sure that you help them. How do they send you a donation?
You can send me a donation at Jacob Duellman, JACOB DUELLMAN at gmail.com, and that is linked through PayPal. Otherwise, you could just shoot me an email, and I can send you a short URL to go directly to PayPal. So that would be the best way to contact me and donate.
Cool. All right. Well, we've got a long outline. Probably for some of the show tonight, I'll just put your notes over my ugly mug and let you just kind of, go along with it. We're going to try to overview a lot and just give the chunks tonight. Let's see what we do. We'll give the best nuggets and then try to summarize some of this research. The issue is that it's, you're digging into 500-year-old history and you're trying to map out this whole scandal and follow along using the trivium and everything and follow each lead out. And, so it's pretty wild how far you've gotten. So now you've discovered a whole series of classic books on history is our nonsense, disinformation associated to banking families nonetheless. So that should be good. But anyway, let's dig into it.
Okay, so this would be, this is Scaliger Notatus, Hallucinatio Scaligeri, part 5. And the way I started doing this research was examining the first series of reference books that got me started down this path, which was the General Dictionary, Historical and Critical, by Thomas Birch. And Scaliger's biography in book number 9, which is like nearly impossible to find. I have a hard copy, which might be the only one in existence that was sold individually. Anyway, I went to look at his writings. So this is a list of Scaliger's works. Thomas Birch went through in his article and he detailed each and every single one of them. Some of them he has a little bit of a blurb commenting on them. Others he just details the sources of the books and where they are derived from. Joseph Scaliger's first book is Conjectania in Marcus Terentium Veronum de Lingua Latina. So this is Marcus Terentius Varro's on the Latin language, translated to English. Scaliger printed his in Paris in 1565, also in 1573 and 1610 in 8 VO. Scaliger wrote this work at 20 years of age. Indeed, this is the first book he ever published. Gerard John Vossius observes that his conjectures are too bold, and he did not act sincerely in suppressing the ancient readings, which he met with in his manuscripts of his author, and adds that Peter Victorius said that Joseph Scaliger was born to corrupt the ancients rather than to correct them. We'll return back to this book later on in the passage, but I thought first we would start with Varro and the Scaliger collection. That would be this book right here. This is a collection of all Scaliger's works and all works associated with them. In the 1990s, this entire set was sold at auction. I do not know how much it was valued at and how much it was sold for, but it was edited by Anthony Grafton, a fellow of the British Academy, and he compiled all the sources that we see inside of this. And they say, a landmark of ancient Latin philology, De Lingua Latina was the first ancient text to claim the attention of Scaliger, and it was a subject of his earliest publication, the Conjectania ad Veronum. First published in 1565, De Lingua Latina were Scaliger's first publication. In 1569, his edition of Varro appeared, including the commentaries of Turnebus, Augustinus, and Peter Victorius. Now, you'll recognize Peter Victorius from the quote just above, where Scaliger was born to corrupt the ancients rather than to correct them. We're going to kind of go back to him further on as we look at the editions of Varro. Now, what's kind of interesting about Varro is that Julius Caesar Scaliger, Joseph's father, and also his primary teacher, had a teacher of his own by the name of Ludovicus Coelius Rodiginus. And Julius Caesar Scaliger calls this man the Varro of the age. Now, this man is a learned Italian whose proper name was Lodovico Celio Riccieri. He was born in Rovigo about 1450. The principal work of this learned man is his Antique Lectiones, of which he published 16 books, and 14 more were added after his death. Editions of the whole folio were printed at Basel in 1566 and at Frankfurt 1666. It is a miscellany, that's 100 years later. It is a miscellany of profound erudition in which, says Gerard Vossius, who was just mentioned up above, abstruse words in Greek and Latin are explained, obscure passages in the best authors are elucidated, and corrupt ones are rectified. Recondite histories and ancient rites are narrated, and many arcana of the deepest philosophy, especially of the Platonic school, are brought to light. Whence I am often moved with wonder, and indeed with indignation, in observing that the precious labors of such a man are so little in the hands of the youth of the present time. Julius Caesar Scaliger, who was a pupil of Rodiginus, also speaks of him with great esteem and calls him the Varro of the age. This was in the General Biography of 1813 by John Aiken. There was, curiously, no passage for Marcus Varro inside of Thomas Birch's encyclopedia from the 1700s. So I looked inside of this edition from 1813 and I found a passage for Varro. And it starts off as, Varro, Marcus Terentius, the most learned of the ancient Romans, began with serving his country in various considerable posts and was presented with a naval crown by Pompey the Great in the piratical war. He joined the party of the chief in the civil war against Caesar, but soon submitted to Tyre latter, and was so much esteemed by him for his learning and judgment that when he adopted the design of forming a public library at Rome, he fixed upon Varro as the person to whom the collection of books was to be confided. The death of Caesar interrupted this design, and in the succeeding troubles, Varro was involved in the proscription by the triumvirates, from which he escaped with life, with the loss and dissipation of his library. On the restoration of tranquility, he entirely devoted himself to his studies in retirement for the remainder of his long life, continuing to compose books as late as his 88th year. He survived to the age of 90 and died about BC 27. About.
So summarize this to us. What does it mean?
Well, what it means? Well, the summary actually is coming right here inside of this. This Varro is the first of major influences on Joseph Scaliger, who writes on the Latin language. And what's interesting about Varro is there aren't really many sources of his that you can find. And as we look here inside of this passage here, we can see that's what they have to say about this. Let's see. Varro has been celebrated for his great learning.
Well, I'm trying to get you to summarize it a bit, but go ahead, whatever.
Well, the problem is there's going to be names that are going to be put on here that are going to lead us to the next spot, and it's really difficult to summarize it without the specific quote that happens right here. Varro has been celebrated for his great learning. And we want to cover Varro. We want to at least cover his biography and see what it is. So Varro has been celebrated for his great learning and various talents by many terms with him, and in his academics represented himself as addressing him in the following manner. This is quote from Cicero. Quote, "Your books, from our being, as it were, wanderers and strangers in our own city, have brought us home and enabled us at length to discover who and where we are. We have laid open the age of our country, the eras of events, the laws of religion, the sacerdotal, domestic, and warlike discipline of the state, the site of places and regions, the names, kinds, offices, and origin of all things human and divine. You have thrown a strong light upon our poets, and indeed upon all Latin letters and words, and have yourself composed a varied and elegant poem in almost every measure, and have made a commencement of philosophy in many parts, sufficient to give the impulse, though short of full instruction." Let's see here. These praises are not exaggerated is testified by the great number of books on different topics which we know to have been written by him. In a passage quoted from him by Aulus Gellius, he relates of himself that of his 70th year of his life, he had composed 490 books, and he continued to live and write to his 90th year. In these, there was not a science on which he had not treated, and we're going to get into this later because we're going to look at Marshall McLuhan and his classical trivium. So that's why it's important to read this. Grammar, eloquence, poetry, the drama, history, antiquities, philosophy, politics, agriculture, nautical affairs, architecture, religion, were all illustrated by his pen, as appears by the catalog of his lost works, drawn up by Johann Fabricius. And that name is really quite curious, and we'll return to kind of look at what Fabricius means a little bit further down. So in what book does Aulus Gellius quote Varro? Well, he quotes this in his book, Attic Nights. Now, what's interesting about this book is that, let's see here. Varro's literary output was prolific. Ritschl estimated it as 74 works and some 620 books, of which only one work survives complete, although he possessed many fragments of the others.
Give us the key points of it there. Give us the importance of it.
Essentially, much of what we get from Varro is supposedly comes through Aulus Gellius and his work, Attic Nights, which is really just a poorly composed set of verses that are basically out of order and are essentially attributed to Varro. But Attic Nights is written about, 100 years supposedly after Varro existed. So it's kind of, we're already getting on sketchy ground here. So if we look into Aulus Gellius and Johann Fabricius, we will see here that his work entitled Noctes Atticae contains numerous extracts from Greek and Roman writers on a great variety of topics connected with history, antiquities, philosophy, and philology, interspersed with original remarks, dissertations, and discussions, the whole drawn together into 20 books without any attempt at order or arrangement. That's what I was trying to get to right there.
Okay, so give us the hard-hitting take-home point. What's the summary of all of this that we're hearing right here?
It's like writing a book and then telling somebody who's in the process of writing their book to detail all the things that they're saying. It's really difficult to do because what I'm going through here is a lot of citations, and every single citation.
Well, I know, but what I'm trying to get you to do is get more into the rhetoric aspect, so that we're pulling the audience along here with it.
Well, this is kind of throwing me off, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to try my best here to do that. So I have to go off the top of my head and stall now because I have to think. Attic Nights. This is just not the way that it's going to work.
All right, yeah, never mind. Go ahead then.
I mean, it's just going to derail me. The rhetoric gets a lot more important the further I go down, and it actually goes into my own words and my own thoughts and how they connect. But right now, this is the primary grammar, and we're not going to understand anything of what I'm saying later on in this interview if I don't get these details out. And if people can't handle that, sorry, that's your own problem. So let's see here. Where was I now?
You're on Alias Gellius, whatever his name is there. And
we're
Johann
talking
Fabricius.
about Noctes Atticae by Aulus Gellius, in which supposedly he sources Varro without really citing any manuscript or any sort of publication whatsoever. It just puts it all in there and says Varro said it. Essentially, that's what the Attignites by Gellius is supposedly doing. Now, what's interesting about this is the 8th book is entirely lost, with the exception of the index, and a few lines at the beginning of the 6th were long wanting until the deficiency was supplied from the epitome of the defined institution of Lactantius, first published in a complete form in 1712 by Pfaff from a manuscript in the Royal Library at Turin. So that's why this is kind of interesting, because you're trying to find these sources for Aulus Gellius and his Attic Knights, and you're continually moving up hundreds of years further into the future to finally get these sources. We're not going back to the primaries. We're not seeing what these passages are supposedly coming from. We're seeing people who are transcribing them, supposedly, and then and then linking them to them. And as we go through this, we're going to see who's actually transcribing.
But it never gets back to the actual primaries, right?
No, that's the problem. Is we're never going back to the primary source, and a lot of times these primary sources never, don't exist, or may never have existed. And
they're all based on Scaliger's words often, or name calling at just his vitriolic attacks that his sources are true, and he never actually provides them.
Well, especially when he's talking about his own family and his own family history, because he lies about their nobility, and he backs it up by using a lot of fallacies and sophistic arguments to try to keep people from looking at that. But even while he was teaching, because he didn't really have a lectureship while he was at Leiden, he just kind of hung around. They still acknowledged his nobility even then. This was long, I think, pretty much long exposed by that time. So quite interesting. So if we kind of look at the extant text of Aulus Gellius, we have the Editio Princeps of Aulus Gellius, which is printed in 1469, which is 19 years after Scaliger's teacher Rodiganus was born, I believe, which is quite interesting. You go through there, it just goes up in the history. So you have 1469, 1472, 1585, 1665, which is just, we're not finding primary sources. We're finding people who are continually.
Yeah, it's constantly going further and further into secondary sources and people talking about people and not the original stuff.
Yeah,
it's like the entire. Psychedelic community that I exposed over the years with Was and these guys, all of them citing each other and nobody going to the primaries. And when you finally get to the primaries, what they all claim is just nonsense.
And that's something that I seem to kind of revisit quite a bit as I go through this, is that they seem to be citing themselves quite a lot. And when I was investigating Marshall McLuhan, that's where it really started to get kind of interesting, because that really started to expose a lot of what appears to be another cell that I've
of McLuhan. Yeah, McLuhan is tied to that whole what is it, the CSIS cell, and what's that guy, Bob Dobbs, the church, Bob Nevins, Dean Nevins Dobbs, Church of the Subgenius guy that runs the McLuhan archives. That's all a big cell, and that was all. McLuhan was tied to Leary, and also that whole cell was tied to the whole MK Ultra group out at Millbrook, etc.
You have to do some more research into that, because I'm kind of curious if I can find more people that tie into that.
Well, I think Bob kind of finally admitted to me. He's got that water ion. I think it's just really ONI. I think it's just a pun on Office of Navy Intelligence.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, they're all just, sophists can be. But anyway, go ahead.
So like there's an author by the name of P.K. Marshall, and he wrote a book in 1983 called Text and Transmission, a survey of the Latin classics. And he claims that the Attic Knights found many readers in antiquity. Writers such as Apuleius, Lactantius, Nonius, Marcellus, Ammianus, Marcellianus, Servius, Augustine, Macrobius, who, without mentioning his name, quotes Gellius verbatim throughout the Saturnalia and is thus at the highest value for the text. I could go and lead us down a digression into those names, but this would take the remainder of the show. But by my accounts, none of those names listed could be accurately sourced or dated to the primary. And
okay, so you talk about like Louis Cario and all these. None of them could be.
Yeah. These are all people who supposedly read Attic Knights in antiquity, which that leads us back into Varro. And if you look at these people and their history, you can't really find a pinpoint much about them or when they possibly existed. There's always this big gray area that kind of hovers around them, where details are just out of grasp.
So not only are they changing the history and erasing Tartary and all of this, but they are manufacturing the historians and citations along the way and doing everything in reverse as they do it.
Possibly. As the study in motion kind of goes through, it kind of lends one to kind of see that this is a possibility, especially when we start touching into aspects of the Catholic Church and certain familial dynasties and certain royal dynasties. You kind of see that a lot of these libraries and stuff kind of tie back to them and a lot of the sources that we kind of see. So if you're looking at manuscripts or anything, I mean, technically you would kind of think, well, if someone's going to have a library, it's going to be a man of wealth. But then you're also kind of thinking if there's somebody who kind of wants to solidify their history and, look like they've been around a lot longer than they probably were to give them a little more prestige.
Yeah.
They might want to, forge a few things. So it's kind of interesting is when I was searching for primary sources of Varro, I find this curious passage, and it's from perseus.tufts.edu, and it says, Barthius, who seems to have been altogether unacquainted with the previous researches of Vicentius, published in his Adversaria, I know Clinton likes that word quite a bit, 18 Sentantiae, which he found ascribed to Varro in a manuscript of no very ancient date, but written before the invention of printing. And these were reprinted by Fabricius in his Bibliotheca Latina.
Which page are you on?
This is on page 5. We're going into page 6.
All right.
So what's interesting about Fabricius, is that what we're going to right here? No, we're going to hold off just a little bit on Fabricius. So indeed, the modern day classical scholar and Scaliger expert Anthony Grafton, a fellow of the British Academy, with links to the Warburg Institute, which we'll talk about in greater detail down the line, writes of Varro in his book, The Footnote, that critical document-based history was by no means confined to the world of Jewish and Christian polemicists, Benedictines, and Jesuits, as I was kind of referring to earlier about potential forgers. By the 5th century BCE, at the latest, Greek intellectuals had begun not only to write narrative histories of great events, but also to produce historical monographs in which they discussed technical problems. Roman scholars followed suit in the 1st century BCE and after. Such scholars, traditionally known as antiquaries, attacked an immense range of subjects. They tried to establish the precise dates on which major historical events had happened. They reconstructed the religious practices and political institutions, public rituals, and private lives of their ancestors. Men like Varro, who wrote on the whole life of the Roman people he belonged to, were the intellectual ancestors of those legendary, broad-gauged social and cultural historians who flourished in the 12th century Strasbourg and Paris, Mont-Blanc, and Lucien Febvre. Now, what's interesting is this also includes men such as Arnaldo Mamigliano, who was Grafton's teacher, and another associated with the Warburg Institute. Mamigliano and the Warburg Institute are also discussed in Scaliger Part 3 for those people who might want to get a little more detail and then want to go back. It is not easy to say, going back to Grafton, it is not easy to say what ancient antiquarian books looked like, since very little of this learned literature has survived except in the form of quotations or epitomes, but it seems almost certain that it included not only coherent texts, but also considerable amounts of primary source material. Seems almost certain. The antiquarian genre sprouted new buds in the 14th and 15th centuries and bloomed outrageously in the 16th and 17th centuries. Scholars scoured the cities and countryside of Europe for Greek and Roman inscriptions, which they assembled in notebooks, and from the early 16th century on, published in more or less faithfully printed collections. Carlo Sigonio, Onofrio Panavino, and others, now listen closely, restructured the whole chronological spine of Roman history on the basis of the Fasti, or inscription found in the 1540s in the Roman Forum. They were reassembled by no less an artist than Michelangelo in the Palazzo dei Conservatori. Now we're going to go jump down the rabbit hole. So the chronological spine of Roman history is that of Varro, or so it is claimed. Varro's supposed chronology, this is me talking right here, Varro's supposed chronology was an attempt to determine the exact timeline of Roman history, inscribed on the Arch of Augustus, an arch that no longer exists. This Fasti Capitolini is said to have the dates set forth by Varro in his chronology that sequences the consuls of the Roman Republic. According to the Wikipedia entry, this chronology has been, quote, demonstrated to be somewhat erroneous, but has become the widely accepted standard chronology, in large part because it was inscribed on the Arch of Augustus, that arch that I just mentioned above that no longer exists. So the Fasti, a modern name assigned because they were deposited in 1547 in the courtyard of Palazzo di Conservatorium, on the
Which
order
page
of
are we on? Sorry.
We're on page 7. So in 1547, in the courtyard of, on the order of Alessandro Farnese, who kept them temporarily in his villa after the excavation from the Roman Forum in 1545 or 1546, and funded by Farnese. Michelangelo, who designed the complex of 3 palaces on the hill, also restored the tables of the Fasti. Now, Alessandro Farnese is an Italian cardinal and diplomat, and a great collector and patron of the arts.
Is it Farnese or Farnese? Something like that.
Farnese, something like that. Farnese. He's an Italian cardinal, a diplomat, and a great collector and patron of the arts. And he was the grandson of Pope Paul III. Now, we're really jumping down the rabbit hole here because he should not be confused with his nephew, Alessandro Farnese, man of the same name, who is the governor of the Spanish Netherlands, grandson of Emperor Charles V, and great-grandson of Pope Paul III. What a close-knit family we have here. So Michelangelo, the art forger. I recently sat down to watch F is for Fake by Orson Welles, a film essay exploring the topic of forgeries and fakes in art, biography, and film. One scene depicts the foremost art forger of the time, Elmire de Hori, painting an original portrait of Michelangelo, afterward signing the piece with a perfect forgery of Orson Welles' signature. And I got a really interesting excerpt from the video here. I don't really have any video software to be able to give us a little clip to show. I don't even know if it'd be possible, but I'm going to read this little transcript right here from the film. Orson Welles. It's pretty, but is it art? Well, how is it valued? The value depends on opinion. Opinion depends on the experts. A faker like Elmire makes fools of the experts. So who's the expert? Who's the faker? This leads into Elmire de Hori, who says, I know one thing. I never offered a painting or a drawing to a museum who didn't buy it. They never refused one. Never. To which Orson Welles then leads into, what's he up to now? This. This isn't a forgery. No, not this time. This is a portrait by Elmire of another famous art forger. Michelangelo, no less. Signed, I must say I'm honored. My signature, forged by Elmire on a real Elmire, is really something. You know, art forgery used to be admired as an art. And though Michelangelo even used smoke on some of his fakes to antique them, like some of the rest of us, and this is Wells referring back to himself, he finally went straight. So really interesting here. It's like, as the story goes, Michelangelo was a protege of Lorenzo de' Medici. He was the leader of the Florentine Republic and patron to the Medici Empire.
Well, let me just interject here, too. And I did a lot of research at Princeton on Orson Welles and the Princeton Radio Project, which became the War of the Worlds and all of that. And Orson Welles worked with the intelligence community and was a part of that whole, it was like a pre-runner to MK Ultra and to cause social panic using radio with the whole invasion and War of the Worlds. So that's... that fits perfectly with Wells's MO, always the fraud.
Yeah, those of you in the audience who haven't seen Jan's show on Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds, definitely check it out. It's worth listening to. It's really interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, and I usually re-release it every Halloween because we released it on Halloween because it happened in Halloween. So, yeah.
I think it'd be a little obvious to people, but I mean, back then they're doing their own. They're trying to put their own UFO scare on us right now. It almost seems like, but that's a digression for another day. So, as the story goes, Michelangelo was a protege of Lorenzo de' Medici, a leader of the Florentine Republic and patron to the Medici Empire. He had some of the finest instructors living under him to train such men as Michelangelo. In spite of such a resume, Michelangelo struggled for money early in his career. As a result, he resorted to forging classical sculpture and artificially aging it. One such piece was sold to the Roman Catholic Cardinal Raphael Riario. Upon realizing that he had been duped and recognizing the obvious talent of Michelangelo, the cardinal invited the young artist to Rome. That's pretty interesting right there. So we go back and now we look at the cardinal has invited the young artist to Rome. Then all of a sudden he's in Rome and he's reconstructing the Fasti Capitolini, and that is reorganizing Varro's chronology. Now, how are we supposed to verify that this is actual and authentic Varro? The arch doesn't exist, and that's where it was originally found. This Fasti is supposedly a transcription of that. And not only that, but this transcription was supposedly excavated, destroyed, or in a destroyed state, I should say, brought back to the cardinal's property, and then reconstructed by Michelangelo, an art forger.
So
we really need to think about that.
The great Michelangelo was actually a forger. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's kind of sad when you think about it too, because at his young age, at 21, you're under the patronage of the Medici family, and supposedly at this age, you don't have any money, even though you've learned under the greatest of the teachers that are out there. It's making fine art, and supposedly have to artificially age something to be able to sell it because it needs to be antiqued. I mean, you can't recognize that for what it is, and then supposedly the Cardinal, Raphael Riario, does recognize it. It doesn't really jive. I mean, we're directly linking Michelangelo, an art forger, to the history of chronological history, the foundation of which Scaliger uses, which we'll talk about later on. Not in this episode. There's a lot of details to cover for that, but probably the next one. It's really a messy kind of world we live in here. So we mentioned earlier, now that we're talking about art forgers, we have mentioned the name Johann Albert Fabricius earlier.
When do we get to expose Loeb?
That's coming up pretty quick here. Once we get into McLuhan, that's when it really starts to get fun. And that's probably about a few pages here.
Yeah.
Once we go through Fabricius, and it'll be pretty quick. Fabricius was the editor of the catalog of Varro's lost works. This is like, late 1600s, early 1700s when these lost works were uncovered from Varro. A long time from when he supposedly existed, over 1,500 years. But hey, whatever. Where did he find these? Well, in the spring of 1693, he left Leipzig for a longer journey and first visited his relatives in Bergdorf. From there, he often came to Hamburg and became acquainted with the Hamburg theologians. And when Albert received news that his father's assets no longer subsidized him, as he had expected, he was traveling around Europe at this time. So he still found himself hindered from continuing his planned trip. He gladly accepted the offer of the senior pastor at St. Jacobi in Hamburg, Doctor of Theology Johann Friedrich Meyer, to come to his house. Meyer always had three or four young scholars in his house, one of whom taught his son, while the others had the supervision of his large library and had to help him with his many scholarly works. On June 13th, 1694, Fabricius moved to Meyer, and since then he no longer had a position outside of Hamburg. Meyer soon realized how immensely useful Fabricius was for him, and a friendship developed between the two, which continued even after Meyer's departure from Hamburg. And this is where it gets interesting for Fabricius. Now, Fabricius had a lot to thank for him. Not only did he find in the library of Meyer, whose order was specially assigned to him, the most abundant resources for his studies, so that he not only made extensive excerpts and collections, quote, Bibliotheca Latina, a Roman literary history giving the most important editions of the writers, and a wealth of other more or less associated antiquarian remarks. And Meyer promoted and favored his studies in every way. It's to the point where he was given a Hamburg office and held a professor of theology, and was given a bunch of other prestigious appointments inside of the academics. So Johann Fabricius. Now, where does Fabricius, that last name, derive from? Well, if we look at it, it derives from the adjective Faber, which is a Roman name, which comes from Louis in short. Now, Faber is, well, let's see here. Let's see, it's a Sanskrit root is ba, which means gleam or shine. In Greek, it leads to say or show. And then we go from there into Latin, a worker in wood, stone, metal, etc. A forger, smith, artificer, carpenter, joiner. So I decided to have some fun because we enjoy dictionaries here in Trivium Land. I went and looked at forger inside of a Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828, and Mr. Webster says a forger is one that makes or forms, or one who counterfeits. A falsifier. And then we look at the Wiktionary, which is just a fun little thing to look at. Forger is a person who falsifies documents with intent to defraud, e.g. to create a false will or illicit copies of currency, or two, a person who forges metals. So what is an artificer in Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828? It's Latin for artifex, from ars and facio. An artist, a mechanic or manufacturer, one whose occupation requires skill or knowledge of a particular kind, as a silversmith or saddler, excuse me. One who makes or contrives. An inventor, as an artificer of fraud or lies. A cunning or artful fellow.
That's funny that they put the they gave the character the name of what, was the fraud, so that it was an admission of it.
And Johann Fabricius was an orphan. And I started looking into that, but it is possible to trace to his father.
So this guy was a real person then?
Oh, he was a real person, and he had a father. But what's interesting about that name, I mean, you can technically, I guess, if you're looking at it, you could say that maybe this was a name of skilled tradesmen back in the day who worked with metals, or actually did arts and crafts.
So he was actually a skilled fraud, a skilled forger. That's that's what he did for his living.
Yeah, his family name, and then you look at him working in this private library of a theologian in Hamburg, of sources we don't know of, we can't check, and then supposedly finds these lost works of Varro, like 1,700 years after he lived, and then publishes them. Interesting to get that book and really chase down those citations. If you look at the etymology of the noun artificer, there's one in there that's pretty interesting. It's a trickster. So when I saw this with Johann Fabricius and the artificers, it led me back to Scaliger Part 3 again, with the Dionysian artificers. And if I could read that quote that I had from there again, which is from a Masonic book, which is, this society was called the Dionysian artificers, as Bacchus was supposed to be the inventor of building theaters, and they performed Dionysian festivities. From this period, the science of astronomy, which had given rise to the Dionysian rites, became connected with types taken from the art of building. The Ionian societies extended their moral views in conjunction with the art of building to many useful purposes, and to the practice of acts of benevolence. They had significant words to distinguish their members, and for the same purpose, they used emblems taken from the art of building. And that's from Joseph da Costa, Dionysian Artificers, which is sourced in The Builders, a story and study of masonry by Joseph Fort Newton. at the Grand Lodge of Iowa.
You know,
So
let me just toss in there really quickly, since we've kept coming across this name with Dennis Batavius, Dionysus, and all of this stuff, and a repetition of this. But so I got an Orthodox study Bible recently, which actually has the Apocrypha in it in the right order. It still doesn't have Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees in their places, but it's got a lot of these books in there. But it's like really interesting to see where the discussions of Dionysus actually go into the Bible there. But anyway, I'm giving away too much. Go on.
Well, so, Dionysus, that's the thing, is like Dionysus is a recurring name in the study of classics and chronology. we were talking earlier about Gerardus Vossius right at the beginning of this episode when I was quoting from Thomas Birch's book. Gerardus Vossius is a contemporary of Scaliger's at the University of Leiden, and he has a son by the name of Dionysius Vossius. Now, Dionysius studied ancient Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Syriac, and Arabic. Vossius published his first Arabic dictionary at the age of 16. Later, he published a Latin translation of a tractate on idolatry from the Mishnah Torah by Maimonides, which he had annotated. It was added to the list of prohibited books of the Catholic Church. That's a fun list to go through, too. So, indeed, the man who would pick up the torch of Joseph Scaliger and his work on chronology would be none other than the French Jesuit theologian Dionysius Batavius, known as Denis Patau by his real name. So, returning to the biography of Varro, what's interesting is the literary reputation acquired by Varro was such that when Asinius Pollio, in the reign of Augustus, opened the first public library in Rome and placed in it the effigies of the most learned persons of every age, he was the only living writer on whom that honor was conferred. Now, I've tried to find this, but I can't find it anywhere.
See, what page are we on here?
We're on page 10, near the bottom.
Okay.
So what's interesting is I've been trying to find this effigy, and I haven't found it. So if somebody has found this effigy of Varro, please send it to me. I've seen a lot of ones that were quoted as being Varro, but they're actually Julius Caesar, or what is supposedly Julius Caesar. So you never know now, because Michelangelo is an art forger.
Well, yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's, to me, the more I look at this, the more we look at this, the more it's clear that you really can't trust anything after like 1400, or anything before, for that matter. It's like they created entire cultures and civilizations like it was Hans Christian Andersen or Grimm brothers. The
Medici family and the Catholic Church certainly have quite a stranglehold at this time in a lot of the documents and a lot of the ways in which history is being formed. So it's really interesting to kind of see that.
Are you starting to be able to see connections back into Tartary as you go?
That's a curious question. That's something I haven't really been trying to. I've been trying to let that just kind of come to me and see. Really, what I'm seeing is something's trying to be covered up. Is there something
huge that they have to rewrite all the books for 200 years?
Indeed, because you look at even works from like the late 1700s, early 1800s. Tartary was written about and talked about. There is primary source information out there to kind of link to Tartary. It's just a matter of trying to get the fundamentals of who's telling the truth and who's not, because again, you're going back to the Jesuits a lot of the time for a lot of the sources that we're seeing out there. And as we're kind of seeing here, the Jesuits and the Benedictines and all of them seem to be almost associated with a lot of art and document forgery. So it's just go out there and then forge, the cultures and histories that are out there already.
Yeah.
There was an article you shared from a woman. I can't remember the name of it. And it was about how the British Empire during like the opium trade changed the history of China. And she had a really compelling argument about it, but I can't quite grasp the name of the article and much of the details. I need to go back to it. But as you can see, it's not on a hand for an empire to go somewhere and kind of cover things up.
Well, I mean, it's clear, like, that China's whole history, Tibet's whole history was like Tibet, the history of the Dalai Lama, et cetera, didn't exist until the late 1400s. And that's right around the time of the collapse of Tartary. Even the Great Wall of China was really the Great Wall of Tartary. The openings are on the north, not the south. It had nothing to do with Mongols. you know, and then you start looking into the history of like Genghis Khan and all this stuff. I don't want to give away too much of Robert's research, but I mean, wow, you know, Robert's really dug up a lot, but Genghis Khan actually means king of kings. I'll just throw that. Thanks, Robert. I'll throw that little bit out. But
Robert right there. You gotta.
I'm signing Robert. Thanks, Robert. Don't be too mad yet. But I mean, it's just so mind blowing when you see how extensive the cover up is that, you know, over the last 400 years. So we're, you know, in our opinion, we're pretty damn certain that it's Tartary that they're all covering up.
Yeah, there's even there's some research that I've sent you in regards to a lot of the goings on in Asia and China, Japan, and even going over to North America. There's another episode that we could probably do, but we just never had time to fit it in. It's not really a Scaliger per se type of thing. It's more of a general history. But essentially, that email, what was it, back in August, July? I can't even remember now. But hopefully we can get into that at some point. But that will definitely go more into what I've been looking into as far as Tartary is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, understanding Tartary also just happens to kind of explain Afghanistan at the same time, you know. Afghanistan. Oops, there goes another slip. Sorry, Robert.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting research out there that relates to Tartary. It's definitely worth exploring. Let's see, where were we in this outline here? We're at about page 10. It's almost halfway through. So let's see here. I guess we can just skip over the Atrium Libertatis. I mean, that's just kind of going over, you know, sensors and stuff like that. We all know what a sensor is, you know. So let's see here.
For those who don't, an officer in ancient Rome. There, it's on screen. Read it. All right, pause the video and read. Okay, now we're on to Varro's biography.
Well, I guess I should say is one who is empowered to examine all manuscripts and books before they're committed to press and to see that they contain nothing heretical or immoral. So those are the people in charge of the libraries.
See, in the U.S., you know, the CIA uses a different process than, say, China. You know, the U.S. uses a strategy called the free market system, where they just flood the market with complete horse shit, and they flood it with so much horse shit that you can't, you know, that the average person that doesn't have the trivium can't distinguish the horse shit from the real research. And then they just throw their arms up in the air and with all the contradictions and scream opinions are like a-holes and we can't know anything. And, you know, like a couple of years ago, as you know, I was coming back from a flight from Princeton, you know, after I was doing probably the War of the Worlds research, one of those trips. And I was sitting next to this Chinese guy and you know, and I was editing a bunch of these, you know, like I had 1,000 pages of documents I got at Princeton. I was cleaning them up, you know, and all this crap. And this Chinese guy next to me is like, no, you know, in China, the censorship is much different because when you write a book, you got to present it to the communist censor, and then he just tells you got to take these, and these out. And, you know, add this, and that, so you actually know, right? You know, he's like, you know, at least they have, like, more integrity about it. I'm like, yeah, here it's just, you know, the free market system. You just flood it with crap. But anyway.
Overload people.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's like the CIA writing all of these books on MK Ultra to control the narrative, and then they just flood it with crap, and then people believe nonsense like John D. Marks and Gordon Wass and Leary and all this stuff.
And they start thinking that men are staring at goats.
Men are staring at goats, yeah, or the acid dreams. You know, that's the worst, absolute most full of crap book I've ever read on MK Ultra.
Well, since we're kind of, you know, talking about intelligence communities, and I guess we can start going into the next stage here, and we're going to finish off with the Varro's biography here. Of his numerous compositions, the only relics that have reached our times are 6 books out of 24, which he wrote on the Latin language. And these imperfect, with 3 books on agriculture and a few fragments of his satires and epigrams. Many editions have been made of these remains separately and in conjunction. So if you look down here, we're now proceeding to Marshall McLuhan, the classical trivium, Varro, grammar, and the classics. Sorry to all the people out there who love reading their classics, but don't check their sources. In 1942, Marshall McLuhan wrote his doctoral dissertation, The Classical Trivium. While exploring,
I have that upstairs. I have read that. It's quite the bit of sophistry.
yeah, it's quite the read. I have my copy right back here. I guess can you see that? Yeah, there we
Yes,
go.
I can.
These are all the books, not all the books, but a lot of the books I've used for the research. There's a lot of other stuff that's just it won't fit. So in 1942, Marshall McLuhan wrote his doctoral dissertation, The Classical Trivium, while exploring, quote, the problem of understanding Thomas Natch, end quote. Marshall McLuhan describes the situation as, quote, that of discovering the main educational traditions from Zeno, Isocrates, and Carneades through Cicero, Varro, Quintilian, Donatus, Priscian, Jerome, and Augustine. Within the following passage, take note that McLuhan's sources, Sir John Edwin Sandys, Fellow of the British Academy, and reviser/editor of Richard Copley Christie's biography of Joseph Scaliger in the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. This biography, among others, is discussed in Scaliger Part 4. In the first chapter of Grammar, McLuhan writes, the logos, or universal reason, is at once the life and order which are in all things and in the mind of man. When the Romans found it impossible to translate logos by any single word, quote, they therefore adopted the phrase ratio et oratios, which means reason and speech. In modern language, it seems clearly to include also the broad notion of universal law, or the law of nature. Law of nature. It has often been pointed out how profoundly this doctrine of the logos was received by Christianity. But it has not been seen that the intermediate stages by which the transference of influence occurred was a grammatical art or discipline, which was common both to the Stoic physics and to the earliest Christian theology. That was sourced through John Edwin Sandys in his A History of Classical Scholarship, which kind of comes up a bit. So seen in the light of the doctrine of the logos, the Stoic interest in etymology as a source of scientific and philosophic knowledge is perfectly natural. Thus, it is somewhat misleading to accept the suggestion of Sandys that the Stoics were interested in etymology because, quote, they regarded language as a product of nature and onomatopoeia as a principle on which words were first formed. Now, onomatopoeia is like sizzle. It's like the word is written out describing the action. The action is actually the word. And that's quoted by through Sandys. In the same place, Sandys seems not to have any notion of the import of his remarks when he tells us that, quote, their grammatical theories were known to Varro, who, as he tells us, and I believe he's saying Sandys, combined the studies of Cleanthes with that of Aristophanes of Byzantium. Cleanthes, the successor of Zeno of Citium, was one of the most important allegorizers, Sandys, and etymologists. And it is no accident that of the 6 extant books of Varro's great De Lingua Latina, 3 are devoted to etymology. One could write an accurate account of the intellectual character of the medieval period in terms of the books of antiquity, which were permitted to survive. Permitted to survive. For the multiplication of manuscripts of ancient works is a precise index of the vogue which they enjoyed. The corollary, unwelcome for some, is that there is none of the extant texts of antiquity which was not more or less widely read throughout the Middle Ages. So,
yeah. So the Middle Ages was the. Never mind.
So you don't even have the sources of people in the Middle Ages, supposedly, anymore. So McLuhan later describes Varro and the extent of his works thusly. Marcus Terentius Varro, with whom we shall be more concerned in this section on rhetoric, gave an elaborate account of the great grammatical dispute between the analogists and the anomalists. Books 8 through 16 were devoted to the subject, and of these, 3 books are extant. The analogists argued for the view that there is a universal grammar, since language is the effect of reason, which is the analogy of the universal logos. The anomalists, one might suppose, were Epicureans who denied the doctrine of logos, though I have been able to find no evidence for this. They asserted that in speech there is no order. All is based on arbitrary custom. And it kind of sounds like we were just talking about a little while ago there. So far, I have tried to indicate in a large and unexplored field how science and grammar were quite naturally united by the concept of language as the expression and analogy of the logos. It is now time to proceed to the business of considering grammatical exegesis proper. And here, there could be no testimony more authoritative than that of Varro, having indicated the province of etymology and semantics as defined by the Greeks. And he says, now this is where he kind of goes and he shows the different layers of language and how they apply to the classes of people. So now I shall set forth the origins of the individual words, of which there are 4 levels of explanation. The lowest is that to which even the common folk has come. The second is that to which old-time grammar has mounted, which shows how the poet has made each word which he has fashioned and derived. The third level is that to which philosophy ascended, and on arrival began to reveal the nature of those words which are in common use. The fourth is that where the sanctuary is, and the mysteries of the high priest. If I shall not arrive at full knowledge there, at any rate, I shall cast for a conjecture. Now, this citation derives from De Lingua Latina, Loeb translation, book 5, and then it's in the introduction, pages 7 through 8. So, De Lingua Latina, the Loeb translation, and it's
well, just really quickly, Jacob, what I wanted to point out is that, you know, McLuhan is even spinning logos there itself, right?
Right on his foot.
Yeah.
It's just spinning it right there. It's quite fascinating to see.
Well, you know, because they have to get logos away from the truth, so then they're using spin against logos, but he even identifies it as natural law, but he doesn't take it that last, step.
Yeah, but actually saying that, it is actually natural law.
It is natural law. It is logos. It is truth.
It's just something to parse and dissect and, not really kind of actually exclaim as being the truth. It's fascinating. I'm going to have to really dive into this book again and really check his sources, because it'd be really interesting to see where else McLuhan is kind of diving into here.
Yeah, I'll have to read it again too. Wow.
So far it's quite fascinating. This is all in the first chapter of this book. So, De Lingua Latina, the Loeb translation, and its primary sources. So the following are passages from the Loeb Classical Library translation of Varro on the extant sources of Varro's writing. And they say that, throughout his life, he wrote assiduously and had a number of books. He wrote about the history of antiquities of Rome, the history of literature and the drama, etc., etc., etc. Of all these, only one, his De Re Rustica, or treatise on agriculture, in 3 books, has reached us complete. I am still searching for that actual source because I'm not seeing how it could be complete because I haven't found the primary yet. His De Lingua Latina, or On the Latin Language, is 25 books, and it's come down to us as a torso. Only books 5 to 10 are extant, and there are serious gaps in these. The other works are represented by scattered fragments only. So, already treading on bad water here. So Varro's treatise on the Latin language was a work in 25 books, composed in 47 to 45 BC and published before the death of Cicero in 43, supposedly. Of these 25 books we have today, apart from a few brief fragments, only books 5 to 10, and in these are several extensive gaps where the manuscript tradition fails. Where the manuscript tradition fails. How can you fail writing a word to a word? Okay, doing it, making it. You don't check your work as it goes through. How can it fail? It doesn't fail unless.
By the official accounts, the scribes kept perfect record, word for word, of everything that was passed on. I feel like there's a quote somewhere here where that kind of tears that apart. I wish I could find it, but I think I don't think I've read it yet. So the fragments of De Lingua Latina, that is, those quotations or paraphrases, and other authors which do not correspond to the extant texts of books 5 to 10, are not numerous nor long. The most considerable of them are passages in the Noctes Atticae of Aulus Gellius, who I was talking about earlier, tying things back to the beginning. Now we're going back to Aulus Gellius and Attic Nights and all these sources. We're not going back to Varro. We're going back to people who were really bad at citing and sourcing and giving us words. It's like picking your atypical worst CIA fraud and using them as the foundation of all of your claims and research, and then like a John D. Marks or a Gordon Wasson or any of these guys.
Oh, we're gonna find some new ones here, I think, down below. So the text of the extant books of the Lingua Latina is believed by most scholars to rest on the manuscript here first listed, from which, except for number 4, all other known manuscripts have been copied directly or indirectly. Number 1, Codex Laurentianus. It's a parchment written in Langobardic characters in the 11th century and now in the Laurentinian Library at Florence. It is known as F. F was examined by Petrus Victorius, mentioned at the beginning of the show, and Iacobus Diacetus in 1521. As we go down here now, in 1521, Petrus Victorius and Iacobus Diacetus collated F with a copy of the Editio Princeps of De Lingua Latina, in which they entered the differences which they observed. Their copy is preserved in Munich, and despite demonstrable errors in other portions, it has the value of a manuscript for verses 119, or for 5:119 to 6:61. Quaternarian has since their time been lost in F. So even more of these editions have been lost since the 1500s. So we're missing pages as we're going through history. Why were they lost? Was someone walking down the aisle and page fell out? Did it disintegrate? What's the details?
Yeah. How do you get certain pages and not? I guess maybe they just only transcribe some pages, so then you can't trust the veracity of the transcription or of the scribe. You know, the scribe's transcription.
Yeah. You know, it's like being a kid playing telephone, and then further along the line as it goes down, the initial phrase becomes butchered more and more and more until by the end of the line, it's completely incomprehensible from the beginning, from its origin. Anyone, let's play that. So if we're looking at this number 4, this exception that the Loeb Classics says, as far as all the primaries for Varro, the grammarian Priscian, who flourished about AD 500, transcribed into his De Figuris Numeromum Varro's passage on coined money, beginning with multa and ending with numi, denari, decue, libella at the beginning. So there are many manuscripts, the oldest and most important being Codex Pericinus 7496 of the 9th century. So we're still here in the Middle Ages. We haven't quite gotten back 1,000 some odd years. You know, we're still right there in the Middle Ages. So if we're looking at the editions...
So are you suggesting, Jacob, that there's not any citations older than the Middle Ages?
Huh. I'm suggesting it. I mean, I'm still doing my work. I mean, this is only about a month's worth of research.
We can't seem to pierce about 1400 though, right?
Well, that's what it seems to be. This manuscript claims to be from the 9th century, supposedly by Priscian, but we're gonna kind of get into that just a little bit down below here. So the editions of the Lingua Latina, we're going to touch on this first because they do mention Scaliger a few times in this book. It talks about the initial one, Conjectiania in Marcus Terentium Veronum de Lingua Latina by Josephus Scaliger. This is not an edition, but deserving a place here, as it contains numerous textual criticisms as well as other commentary. Both these, Conjectiania and an appendix ad Conjectiania, the original date of which I cannot determine, says the editor, are printed with many later editions of the De Lingua Latina. So there's an appendix to this of no original date, and you cannot determine it. Doesn't know where it came from. There's an appendix to it. So we're looking back at that number 4 there, that copy from the 9th century by the grammarian Priscian. Let's look into Priscian. So Priscian, commonly known as Priscian, was a Latin grammarian and the author of the Institutes of Grammar, which was a standard textbook for the study of Latin during the Middle Ages. It has also provided the raw material for the field of speculative grammar. Priscian's life. The details of Priscian's life are largely unknown. Priscian was born and raised in the North African city of Caesarea, the capital of the Roman province of Mauritania Caesariensis, excuse me. According to Cassiodorus, he taught Latin at Constantinople in the early 6th century, and supposedly the manuscript we have is from the 9th. His minor works include a Panegyric to Anastasius, written about 512, which helps establish his time period. Now, I put that little footnote there after 512 in red because they decided to check that out and see where this is because it supposedly helps establish its time period. Well, this is sourced from the Catholic Encyclopedia of 1913, volume 12, by Paul Leger. They said that, again, he's a Latin grammarian. He delivered the panegyric of the Emperor Anastasius about 512. We possess this work in 312 hexameter verses, preceded by a prologue of 22 iambic sonari. Priscian lacks judgment and taste, but he is valuable because he has preserved for us the theories of the Greek grammarians and numerous Latin quotations for which he is our sole authority. Wow. Quite an important position for a man whose life is unknown. For the share of the 8th and 9th century Irish monks in transmitting the text of Priscian, see Trobe, O Roma Nobilis, printed in Munich in 1891. So, a quick check of the sources for this article by the Catholic Encyclopedia, aside from transcriptions from Irish monks somewhere within the course of 200 years inside the 8th and 9th centuries, supposedly, we see books from the late 1800s and, shock, fellow of the British Academy Sir John Edwin Sandys' 1909 book, A History of Classical Scholarship, quoted by Duellman. Sandys revised and edited Richard Copley Christie's Scaliger article from the 9th edition and the 11th from the 9th edition Britannica and the 11th edition Britannica, as I've been pointing out repeatedly throughout this podcast. So, what is the first primary source of Varro? Where did that come from again? Codex Laurentianus? Well, let's look into what the Laurentinian Library is. So the Laurentinian Library is a historic library in Florence, Italy, containing more than 11,000 manuscripts and 4,500 early printed books. Built in a cloister of the Medician Basilica di San Lorenzo di Firenze under the patronage of the Medici Pope, Clement VII, the library was built to emphasize that the Medici were no longer merchants, but members of intelligent and ecclesiastical society. It contains the manuscripts and books belonging to the private library of the Medici family. The library is renowned for its architecture, designed by Michelangelo, and is an example of mannerism. Codex Laurentianus identifies any of the book-bound manuscripts in the library. So there we go. We go right back to the Medicis, Michelangelo, and their family of forgers, which then go back to the Catholic Church.
Hey, we're just gonna toss in this ancient library to legitimize this family. That they're no longer merchants; they've made it. So hey,
they're not just merchants anymore, running an empire. They're now running the Florentine Empire and the Church of Rome. Fascinating family.
They wouldn't have any reason to add any BS manuscripts to their library now, would they? That'd be conspiracy, conjecture.
Oh man, if only I could talk about those things, because I got a lot of other top stuff I can put into this, but that's for another day. Let's return back to the Loeb Classical Library. So, what is?
So I'm really interested in this because a lot of people out there that claim to be scholars of one sort or another, most of them are incompetent by reason of evidence. It really seem to base the foundations of their so-called knowledge on this Loeb classical stuff.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go back and read the classics, I mean, it seems like this is where you're going to start finding your sources. So what is the Loeb Classical Library from which McLuhan sources Varro? So the Loeb Classical Library is a series of books today published by Harvard University Press, which presents important works of ancient Greek and Latin literature in a way designed to make the text accessible to the broadest possible audience by presenting the original Greek or Latin text on each left-hand page and a fairly literal translation on the facing page. Now, original or, transcriptions, copies, these forgeries, these aren't, we're not looking at primary sources when we're seeing that. But anyway, the Loeb Classical Library was conceived and initially funded by the Jewish German American banker and philanthropist James Loeb, born in...
Wait a second. I could swear that Gordon Wasson. How did his name come up again? He actually worked with Kuhn Loeb and Company. He was the representative for J.P. Morgan. Huh.
Oh, interesting. When we go into James Loeb, you're gonna see that the name is quite fascinating, especially when we. Oh man, we're jumping ahead here. Let's just.
all right.
Let's just get there because I know you're gonna want to have a lot of fun with this. So, the Globe Classical Library was conceived and initially funded by Jewish German-American banker and philanthropist James Loeb. He was born in 1867 and died in magical number 33.
But wait. Notice how he was born 33 years before the turn of the century, died 33 years after the turn of the century for 6.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah. Well, and you can add it like 666. Never mind.
So curious. Get the 3333, and seems like it has quite a Masonic importance to it. Not only that, but it seems to have ties to the intelligence community. If people who listen to No Agenda might know what I'm talking about. They like to kind of digress into those theories quite a bit. Not only that, but I believe Jesus died at the age of 33, didn't he?
Yeah. Huh.
So the Loebs have only a minimal critical apparatus when compared to other publications of the text. They are intended for the amateur reader of Greek or Latin and are so nearly ubiquitous as to be instantly recognizable. In 1917, Virginia Woolf wrote in the Times Literary Supplement, quote, "The Loeb Library, with its Greek or Latin on one side of the page and its English on the other, came as a gift of freedom. The existence of the amateur was recognized by the publication of this library and to a great extent made respectable. The difficulty of Greek is not sufficiently dwelt upon, chiefly perhaps because the sirens who lure us to these perilous waters are generally scholars who have forgotten what those difficulties are." Do you really want to equate scholars with sirens who lead you out to your death? Do you really want that? I mean, it's almost like, you're going to put your mind in an ocean. We're going to take you out to sea and we're just going to destroy your mind. But hey, whatever. Okay.
You're going to hypnotize you with their voice and lead you out, into, interesting choice of words there,
They'll just drown you in information.
Quite fitting, really.
But for the ordinary amateur, they are very real and very great. And we shall do well to recognize the fact and to make up our minds that we shall never be independent of our Loeb. So Harvard University assumed complete responsibility for this series in 1989, and in recent years, 4 or 5 new or re-edited volumes have been published annually. As the command of Latin among generalist historians and archaeologists, shrank in the course of the 20th century, professionals came increasingly to rely on these texts designed for amateurs. As Brigitte Hoffmann remarked in 2001 of Tacitus's Agricola, quote, "Unfortunately, the first thing that happens in bilingual versions like the Loebs is that most of this apparatus vanishes, and if you use a translation, there's usually no way of knowing that there were problems with the texts in the first place." So who's James Loeb? Now we're going to go back into the Kuhn Loeb and Company that you're talking about earlier.
Okay, so now let's see a second. Now we're on page 17. Correct?
Yep. Yeah, we're steaming right along here. So James Loeb was a German-American banker, Hellenist, and philanthropist. So if you look at his biography, James Loeb was a second-born son of Solomon Loeb and Betty Loeb. He joined his father at Kuhn Loeb and Company in 1888 and was made partner in 1894. But he retired from the bank in 1901 due to severe illnesses.
But wait, dude, because I mean, we should trust this guy because he's a banker. I mean, he's rich and he's Jewish and he's friends with Gordon Wasson.
And he's a philanthropist. He's only doing nice things.
Right. I mean, because philanthropists don't give out money to, better their image for all the evil shit that they do. I mean, that's
it's not greenwashing, it's benevolence.
You don't have like the McDonald. Never mind. I'll skip it. I don't want to get involved in any litigious, bullshit.
Well, we don't need to do that. We can just have some fun with what we got coming up next year because you're gonna love this.
All right.
In memory of his former lecturer and friend Charles Eliot Norton, in 1907, Loeb created the Charles Eliot Norton Memorial Lectureship. In 1911, he founded and endowed the Loeb Classical Library and founded the Institute of Musical Art, which later became part of the Juilliard School of Music. That year, he also turned over his collection of Eretine pottery to the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard.
Hey, I gotta just throw something in here because all these bankers that go and they create libraries at Harvard. I mean, there's not really anything to that, because J.P. Morgan creating the Botanical Museum where they put all of Was and stuff, and Loeb doing that, and them all being in bed together, maybe literally. I mean, that doesn't have. There's no coincidence there. That's just right. I mean, this is maybe it's coincidence.
I don't know. I'm not much of a coincidence theorist, but so let's see, where were we here? We were at Fogg Art Museum at Harvard. So we're talking about all those people in in the library. So Loeb donated a large amount of funds to what is now called the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry, which helped his former psychologist Emil Kraepelin to establish and maintain the institute in its early days. I couldn't help but look into who this psychiatrist Emil Kraepelin was. I mean, it was just begging for me to look him up. So who is
Eisenach? Why does that name sound familiar? Wait, go ahead. Sorry.
So Kraepelin was a German psychiatrist. H.J. Eisenach's Encyclopedia of Psychology identifies him as the founder of modern scientific psychiatry, psychopharmacology, and psychiatric genetics.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, look at that.
There wouldn't be any relation to like the rest of the stuff we've exposed on this show for years.
I was looking into the psychopharmacology, and it's kind of interesting. One of the first pictures to see on there is not the magic mushroom, but the Amanita muscaria.
Huh.
Yeah.
Really? Popularized by Gordon Wasson.
So Kraepelin believed the chief origin of psychiatric disease to be biological and genetic malfunction. His theories dominated psychiatry at the start of the 20th century, and despite the later psychodynamic influence of Sigmund Freud, who we talk about in part 3, and his disciples...
Wait, because we're not coming back to friends of Wasson, are we? Or Bernays and related... Never mind. Sorry, go ahead.
But we're actually looking at somebody who is, I guess you could say, a competitor of Freud's for...
Well, but I mean, it's like, a half a...
There's a thread still tying together here.
Yeah.
So later, let's see... His theories dominated psychiatry at the start of the 20th century, and despite the later psychodynamic influence of Sigmund Freud and his disciples, enjoyed a revival at century's end. He has been described as a scientific manager and political operator who developed a large-scale, clinically oriented epidemiological research program. And boy, quite interesting. So his influence. So Kraepelin's great contribution in classifying schizophrenia and manic depression remains relatively unknown to the general public, and his work, which has neither the literary quality nor paradigmatic power of Freud's, is little read outside scholarly circles. Kraepelin's contributions were also to a large extent marginalized through a good part of the 20th century during the success of Freudian ideological theories. However, his views now dominate many quarters of psychiatric research and academic psychiatry. Thinking back to psychopharmacology. His fundamental theories of the diagnosis of psychiatric disorders form the basis of the major diagnostic systems in use today, especially the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-4 and the World Health Organization's ICD system, based on the research diagnostic criteria and earlier finer criteria developed
neither the literary quality based on the world's psychiatric association world,
Yeah, so it's quite an
literary. Yeah, but his work isn't of the literary quality to be represented publicly. But they got to base everything on it because it's true, right?
It's so important, but nobody needs to know about him popularly. Let them have Freud. We'll have Kraepelin, and we'll work underneath underneath his, what was that, literary quality and paradigmatic power.
But Freud, brought us like incestuous nephews and family members like Bernays, so we got to go with that.
Let's see here. So we can skip over the psychopharmacology because he pretty much talked about that there. But basically, it's a scientific study of the effects drugs have on mood, sensation, thinking, and behavior, focusing primarily on the chemical interactions with the brain. Why would they want to do that, I wonder?
Huh. Well, because there wouldn't be any ties to J.P. Morgan Bank, Kuhn-Loeb and Company, the Warburg family, that funded LSD research at Sandoz, that did MK Ultra. Never mind, I'm getting ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, we'll start tying that together a little bit closer. So returning to James Loeb, his relationship to Emil Kraepelin and the membership to the English Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies. So we're going back to James Loeb's biography inside of the Wikipedia article, which is interesting to mine from, but it's not my only source. Nevertheless, presumably unknown to Loeb, Kraepelin helped.
Wait. I just want to enter just a second. Somebody says, I get your point, but I don't think Caesar or Roman history is fake.
Well, it's not necessarily that it's fake. We're looking at the fact that the history of it and the timeline is not correct, and we're not sourcing it. Who says it was 1,500 years ago, and how are they making that? That's the real question.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're and you have to
sort of a society that existed that maybe was fractured, and then their knowledge was then taken, forged, remade, and then disseminated under different names to give certain different empires and religions a certain prestige. It's not necessarily that these people are fake. That's that
it's that certain stories and narratives were people were renamed, places were rewritten, and then they were just thrown back into history like frisbees. It's not that the whole narrative is necessarily fake. It's just that there's many copycats, and then they kind of manufactured a lot of it. I mean, you might have 10 different stories of the same king spread out over 1,000 years, but the official narrative is that there are actually 10 kings when there really one.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflation. There's a lot of deflation, and there's a lot of contradictory phrases. There's a lot of conflicting stuff that's out there, and it's important as a student to look at your sources and think logically about what you have, and continually dig for primaries. You
can't get Jacob. We got to stop making people doubt that the official historical narrative might not be true. I mean, these people like Bernays. I mean, everybody knows what a great guy, a forger. Everybody knows Wasson was a great guy. Bernays, all of these people, Scaliger. These are some of the most glamorized frauds in history that we need to be, upholding.
Yeah, it's important to put a magnifying glass on these people and revisit it. Just because somebody hasn't written about it doesn't mean...
Are you saying magnifying glass with the sun so it burns? Like when you burn ants, Sorry.
You burn ants, you still want to burn books. That's don't want to burn books because it seems a lot of people burn books over the time, and we don't really have these primary sources anymore. It's almost like some people didn't want us to trace these sources back.
This idiot is getting banned here. Sorry, this guy that thinks we're afraid to say Jewish people when we already talked about that. But Prince Adam is a retard that is banned. Bye. Sorry, go ahead.
So, nevertheless, presumably unknown to Loeb, presumably unknown. Okay, we're not saying that it was unknown. Presumably, this is conjecture. To Loeb, Kraepelin held racist views about Jews. Is that a religion or a race?
Jewish. Well, that, in the 1700s, they made it into a race, but for all the history before that, there was no such race. It was a religious system based on denying logos.
And they're because there's like African Jews, and
right, yeah. I mean,
And it's just a sketchy territory there with the grammar right there. It's sometimes something that needs to be examined a little bit closer. Not for this moment. So, the students who took over the institute, Ernst Rudin, as his Kraepelin's student, Ernst Rudin was a leading advocate of racial hygiene and forced sterilization or killing of psychiatric inpatients, for which he was personally honored by Adolf Hitler. A large portion of his significant art collection he left to the Museum Antiker Kleinkunst in Munich. Loeb was a member of the English Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies. So I started looking into the English Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies, and I came across a hornet's nest. So James Loeb, banking cartels, Rhodes Roundtable, and the creation of the Third Reich. As I was searching through...
So you're saying Jewish bankers created the Third Reich?
Well, I mean, they're behind certain people who worked for them and
Because
funded
I've
their.
other people have claimed that before. So you're actually finding the meat to it.
I'm seeing associations that are they're sketchy. I mean, when you're saying that he presumably unknown to Loeb, you're almost it's not saying
You're talking about Adolf Schicklgruber, right?
talk about Kraepelin, Loeb and Kraepelin, but
Oh, sorry. Schicklgruber was Adolf Hitler's other name.
Oh, sorry, that went right over my head. Sorry about that. That's more research I need to go into. I haven't really followed that too far down the rabbit hole, but I'm sure it'll take me to amazingly weird places. So I was looking online trying to find some sources that kind of link James Loeb and check the citations about Emil Kraepelin and all these people. So found a book by a man by the name of Jim Keith. It's called Mind Control, World Control. And thanks to a Google preview, I was able to see this excerpt, which kind of exposes a lot of the detail. And I was able to check a lot of citations, and they seem to go check through. James Loeb was a relative of the Warburg banking family, key among the elite controllers in London, and a business partner of William Rockefeller. The Rockefellers and the Warburgs had initially bankrolled the pivotal American Harriman family and their enterprises, channeling monies provided by Sir Ernst Cassel, banker to the British royals. The Rockefellers, the Warburgs, and the Harrimans are familiar faces, appearing again and again during the creation of the primary social control mechanisms of this century, including...
Wait a second. Are you talking about the Council on Foreign Relations? Because those are all the names that I see when I'm like spending weeks at Princeton, going through the Council on Foreign Relations archives at the Mudd Library. There, those are the same names.
Interesting. James, or is that? I'm sorry. Jim
so
Keith,
you're saying that your research and my research is all connected, all right in.
It's right here. And it connects over to Jim Keith too, if he's listening. Hey, Jim, thanks for the passage. So let's see here. Where was I? So the Warburgs are familiar faces appearing again and again during the creation of primary social control mechanisms of the century, including eugenics and psychiatric mind control. Going back to Loeb, Kraepelin, and psychopharmacology. So I decided to go and find some sources on here to link James Loeb to the Warburgs. And I went to jamesloeb.de.
Oh, I was just going to say I could probably look in my Warburg stuff that I pulled from Princeton, and I probably just have their names on the same
probably
CFR files and CIA files.
Yeah, you should definitely dig in that and see what you can find in James Loeb, because it seems like we just opened up another actor inside of this grand stage. So I went to jamesloeb.de. This is supposedly a site dedicated to him. Wow, it's fascinating. So in his spacious estate in Murnau Hochried, built by his Munich friend and architect Karl Sattler, Loeb led a secluded life and maintained contact with only a few friends and family, most notably with the banking family Warburg from Hamburg. The prominent art historian...
Oh, shit.
Prominent art historian Abby Warburg, who was twice related to Loeb by marriage, was close to him not only in proximity, but also because of their similar natures and because of their cultural affinities as well. Both worshipped the German culture, had interest in art history, and were passionate collectors. Loeb built an art collection and its associated library, as well as his classical library. Warburg was concerned with questions of art theory, for instance, the investigation of iconology and methodology of art history. He built, similar to Loeb, a corresponding cultural history research library, which was founded in 1900 and still stands in London today. Because of his immense wealth, Loeb saw not only the possibility, but took as an obligation to provide extensive social support for others. He donated to and supported a great number of educational and social organizations, not only in the United States. For example, Harvard University. That's in the United States, but anyway, okay. But was also unusually generous patron in Munich, for example, supporting the German Research Institute on Psychiatry, today known as the Max Planck Institute for Psychiatry. He also founded the first Munich dormitory for women, the Marie Antonie House. So going back to Jim Keith's book.
I'm just going to throw this in really quick. I just had the brain on screen while you were talking. And Kuhn-Loeb Company funded the mass murderer Leon Trotsky.
Whoa! That was like a big mic drop right there. That's insane, man. Wow. So he's the funder.
This is we're at the core. We're at the core. Yay! We got there. Woo!
And it's only gonna get darker. Oh shoot! No, not gonna like when I have to read a little bit further down, especially now that we're linking Trotsky to all this. So we're going back to Jim Keith in his book, where he says these families acted in collusion with the roundtable groups founded by Cecil Rhodes, himself a Freemason and operative of the Rothschild banking family, as well as the Skull and Bone Society in America. Now we're going to go, and I have some observations of my own right here. So when I first began my research, I noticed that Sir Victor Gollancz worked with the Roundtable Group. Victor Gollancz is a principal funder of British Mass Observation, publisher to Mass Observation's architect, Brigadier General Thomas Harrison, and publisher of the Fabian Society Front the Left Book Club. Victor edited a book on feminism for the Roundtable Group titled The Making of Women, Oxford Essays on Women. Indeed, Victor Gollancz worked closely on the topic of education in the New World with Arnold Toynbee's student and abridger, David Churchill Somerville. Arnold Toynbee writes The Study of History, a 12-volume universal history, of which Somerville abridges. So, returning back to Jim Keith now we're seeing that Roundtable Group and all this stuff. Now we're going back into British Mass Observation, Victor Gollancz. Oh, it's now the web is really starting to tighten here. So, although the Rhodes Roundtable groups were originally financed primarily by the Rhodes Trust since 1925, substantial funding has been provided by the Carnegie United Kingdom Trust, whose first president in 1902 to 1905.
We're on page 20.
Yeah, we're getting close here. Was a bonesman, Daniel Coit Gilman, a man key in the subversion of American education, and organizations associated with J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, the Whitneys, and the Lazards. Actually, one of the New World Order's early projects was the creation of the Third Reich. Now, I haven't necessarily connected that, but you kind of see that, if you're looking at what the New World Order is, these people are there. So factually, I guess it could be correct. Nazism, in fact, differs very little from the New World Order philosophy, except in its emphasis on German nationalism. After Hitler's ascent to chancellorship in 1933, sponsored by many of the men who lusted after a New World Order, psychiatric institutes controlled by Ernst Rudin were incorporated into the Nazi machine. Rudin, who comes from
Did you say 1933? Sorry.
Yeah, that's when Loeb dies.
Yeah, that's when Hitler
sends when Loeb dies. So Rudin became head of the Racial Hygiene Society, and Rudin and his staff in the Task Force on Heredity, chaired by SS Chief Himmler, instituted the German sterilization law, which is based upon existing American laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So if you look at the Wikipedia article, they're painting it as being this is like a Nazi creation and it's really evil. But then you go, water and spot the things, and it reaches.
Well, it's like all the time when I'm researching MK Ultra, they always try to say, well, the Germans started this, so the Jews had to do all of this stuff in the U.S. under the CIA to, because the Germans did it, and so the Jews had to, mind control millions of people in the U.S.
Oh, this is just sick. The further I dive into this stuff, it's the depravity of these minds is just insane. When you're talking about psychopaths, like, you aren't kidding. These people they're really messed up, and they have a lot of energy. So here we now tie James Loeb directly to the banking cartels responsible for much of the turmoil and strife exposed time and again on this show through the research of Jan and others. See my presentation for Scaliger Part 3 for a look inside the Warburg Institute, a school dedicated to classical studies. So now we're going to move on to the next section.
Wait, are you saying we can almost wrap up the UnSpun show? Like, we're going to be done here and able to go on to a new project soon, it sounds like.
Quite possibly.
Did I just let the cat out? Anyway, go on.
there's definitely not, for me, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to be doing well into the future. But I mean, as far as the stuff that we're handling right now, we're kind of coming close to the Scaliger series. They probably have one more, maybe two.
Well, yeah, I mean, all the last, 5, 6, 7 years of research is all coming full circle right now.
That's true. I mean, we are seeing a lot of the topics you've been covering are coming right back again, right into this research. It's quite fascinating. and exhausting. So, James Loeb and the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies ties back into my early research into British mass observation and the British Academy. This is coming from me here. So, during the early years of the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies, they had two distinct presidents. Now, the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies, where James Loeb is a member of. So during the early years of the society, they had two distinct presidents pivotal in the early development of the British Academy. These men are classical scholar Sir Richard Claverhouse Jebb, friend of Constance and Leopold de Rothschild, and Sir Frederick George Kenyon. So Sir Kenyon is father to Kathleen Kenyon, and together are the namesake of the Kenyon Institute. Prior to employing this name, the institution was referred to as the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. Sir Frederick George Kenyon, along with Professor Sir Israel Gallants, uncle to Victor Gallants of British mass observation fame, are pivotal in the formation of this school, thanks in part to the British mandates in Jordan and Palestine. The same mandates that set the wheels in motion to form the École Biblique, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Father Roland DeVoe's speech on the subject in the British Academy in the 1950s.
And now we're already back to John Allegro, and then that would bring us back to Robert Eisenman, and École Biblique is stated to have actually been the Holy Inquisition office of the Vatican before it was the École Biblique.
Fascinating. It's also it's run by the Dominican Order as well.
Yeah. So, and then and I've been suspecting for the last several months at least that the Dead Sea Scrolls are fake, and because the Dead Sea Scrolls were found the same year that Israel was created. I think that they were plants there to legitimize Israel there, because it really looks like Israel was really Tartary and not like Israel in Palestine. That all appears to be a much later fabrication. But the Dead Sea Scrolls were the first and oldest documents found there that legitimized Israel's creation in 1943. Wait, who is the first ambassador to Israel? Wait a second. Oh, darn it. Wasson.
You almost lost that one there.
We almost got, I don't know how, 15, 20 minutes without mentioning Wasson, but it was actually Thomas Campbell Wasson, Wasson's twin-looking-ish brother that I have put up. Let's see, hold on. I just want to show this because this guy really looked like Gordon Wasson. This is the first ambassador to Israel. That's not, ladies and gentlemen, that is not Gordon Wasson. That is Thomas Campbell Wasson, who looks almost identical to Wasson. He was the first Campbell, the consul general of the newly created Israel. He was assassinated the first week of Israel's creation on May 23. He was shot like 10 days after Israel was founded. So and then just to point out, May 13, which is listed right here. May 13 is a significant date because here's this guy Wasson again. So Wasson, Gordon, the not the twin brother, this Wasson here, this scumbag right here, this CIA criminal, he launches his seeking the magic mushroom bullshit and distorting Maria Sabina's whole history on May 13, 1957. And and guess what day it was when I released all of those articles firing back at the CIA? It was, in fact, May 13.
It's quite the fitting date to do that, man.
Yeah, I might take up an April 13 something, because that's like the day they kicked off MKUltra officially. But
we should probably keep that down into the dirt and bury it.
Yeah.
So let's see, where were we here? We're talking about. Okay, so we're talking about the Hellenic, the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies, and we just talked about the first. I'm sorry, were we talking about the? Okay, so the same mandates that set the wheels in motion to form the Ecole Biblique, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Father Roland de Vaux's speech on the subject in front of the British Academy in the 1950s. So, in addition to being president of the British Academy and the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, Sir Frederick George Kenyon also served as director and principal librarian to the British Museum. Where is that book? I have an interesting book of his where he supposedly looks at the ancient philology and papyri. Anyway, I won't bring that down. That'll waste time. So he was gentleman usher of the Purple Rod, serving, quote, no specific function, but the statutes require that the usher shall, quote, execute diligently whatever the sovereign or grand master may be pleased to command touching the interests of the said order.
What page are we on? Sorry.
We are on page, I believe, 21 near the end of it.
Okay.
Just before the link to the Purple Rod.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So, indeed, 4 of the first 6 presidents of the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies were members of either the British Academy or the Royal Society. Of the 2 who did not belong, the first, Joseph Lightfoot, passed before the inception of the British Academy. But not to be left unmentioned, Lightfoot served as editor to the Journal of Classical and Sacred Philology. He was Holstein professor at Cambridge, and shortly afterwards, chaplain to the Prince Consort and honorary chaplain in ordinary to Queen Victoria. Quite an interesting and fascinating position to be in. He was the first president of the Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies. So he not only is he the president and the founder, he is also the chaplain to Queen Victoria. Wow. So the other not belonging to the British Academy or the Royal Society was Walter Leaf. Quote, an English banker, another banker again, classical scholar, and psychical researcher. He published a benchmark edition of Homer's Iliad and was a director of Westminster Bank for many years, eventually becoming its chairman. He was a co-founder and later president of the International Chamber of Commerce and served as president of the Institute of Bankers, the Hellenic Society, and the Classical Association. He married Charlotte Simmons, daughter of John Addington Simmons. He, Walter Leaf, was a Cambridge apostle. Now we're really going somewhere. So before we go there, what is the London Institute of Banking and Finance? It seems kind of a dry name, but it's a registered educational charity incorporated by Royal Charter. Established in 1879 as an Institute of Bankers, the London Institute of Banking and Finance offers a number of qualifications for financial capability for 14 to 19-year-olds, undergraduate, master's, and continuing professional development and executive education qualifications and programs. So again, we're going to tie back again to the education of our youth through bankers. So back to the Cambridge Apostles. Sir Richard Jebb, mentioned above, one of the presidents of the Hellenic Society, and also a founder of the British Academy.
Shit.
John Maynard.
All right, wait. You got to stop right there. Okay, why am I laughing? All right, so hold on, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so John Maynard Keynes. Or Keen, however the hell, whatever. Okay, so
Keynes almost sounds like.
Okay, so he was Fabian and belonged to the British Eugenics Society and helped the new School for Social Research
Yep.
and was pals with this guy. What's his name again? I forget. This guy Gordon Wasson. I don't think we've mentioned him yet this show.
He's also associated with the Gallant family, I believe, if my memory is serving correctly.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
That's the whole London School of Economics too. That
yeah,
whole fraud.
which is all Fabian Society. I mean, that's
Yeah,
created
yeah,
by
yeah,
them.
yeah.
So Richard Jebb, who I just mentioned, John Maynard Keynes and Leonard Woolf, husband to Virginia Woolf, are notable Cambridge apostles. Virginia, a member of the Bloomsbury Group, along with Keynes, Bertrand Russell, Lytton Strachey, and her husband Leonard, is quoted discussing her love of the Loeb classics earlier in this presentation. It was through certain Cambridge apostles that the Bloomsbury Group, comprising members of the Apostles, Fabian Society, and the British Academy, was created. The Bloomsbury Group, deeply influenced literature, aesthetics, criticism, and economics, as well as modern attitudes towards feminism, pacifism, and sexuality.
Oh, that doesn't sound like MK Ultra.
No, not at all. And these aren't agents, definitely. Oh, wait, they are. So the Cambridge spy ring.
And they didn't have anything to do with MI6, right? You're gonna tell me that this has nothing to do with MI6 and CIA, right?
Yeah, or KGB, nothing at all. Oh, wait, it does. So, so the Cambridge spy ring.
Shit. Damn it. Okay, wait. I don't see. Wait. Oh shit. There's MI6. Never mind. All right.
We have MI5, MI6, KGB. So the apostles came to public attention again following exposures of the Cambridge spy ring in 1951. 3 Cambridge graduates with access to top levels of government in Britain, one of them a former apostle, were eventually found to have passed information to the KGB. The 3 known agents were Apostle Guy Burgess, an MI6 officer and secretary to the Deputy Foreign Minister, Donald MacLean, Foreign Office Secretary, and Kim Philby, MI6 officer and journalist. That's not a conflict right there.
Huh. Wait. Because Wasson was CIA and he studied journalism at Columbia.
It's also a PR spinster as well, wasn't he?
Well, I mean, he was just like the vice president of J.P. Morgan Bank in charge of propaganda, and he just worked with Edward Bernays for like at least a decade, but it's probably just a coincidence,
The Edward Bernays related to Jacob Bernays, who wrote Joseph Scaliger's biography.
Yeah, but that's just, a coincidence too. And then, it's like, I don't know. I don't want to use such a grotesque analogy. It's like taking, decades of CIA stuff and just ripping the top of it off for the whole world to see and crapping in it,
Well, let's rip it off a little bit more here.
Yeah, let's just see tear that scab all the way off, whatever we want to call it. Maybe that's a little more polite, scab.
So it is, that's a gaping wound. So in 1963, American writer Michael Straight, also an apostle and later publisher of the New Republic magazine, admitted to a covert relationship with the Soviets, and he named Anthony Blunt, MI5 officer, director of the Courtauld Institute, and art advisor to the Queen, as his recruiter and a Soviet spy. Whoa! So the Courtauld Institute, where does that come from? So the Courtauld name might ring a bell from earlier. The Courtauld and Warburg Institutes are related. Upon moving from Hamburg to England, it was the Courtaulds who aided their change in location. Together, they published the Journal of Warburg and Courtauld Institutes. They're tied together. So all their scholarly works on art and history, they published them. So going back to the Cambridge Apostle spy ring. Confronted with Straight's confession, Blunt acknowledged his own treason and revealed that he had also drawn into espionage his fellow apostle, Leonard Leo Long. Straight also told investigators that the apostle John Peter Asbury had been recruited for Soviet intelligence by either Blunt or Burgess. Leo Long confessed to delivering classified information to the Soviets from 1940 until 1952. Interesting that there's the Queen is so tightly connected to KGB. So, right after several other apostles of being witting Soviet agents, Roland Perry in his book The Fifth Man makes a circumstantial case against Victor Rothschild, 3rd Baron Rothschild, who is a friend to both Burgess and Blunt. The espionage historian John Costello in The Mask of Treachery points a finger at the mathematician Alistair Watson. Kimberly Cornish, in his controversial The Jew of Linz, makes the rather extravagant claim that Ludwig Wittgenstein was the Eminence Grise of the Cambridge spies. Excuse me if I butchered that phrase. In the 1930s, when Guy Burgess and Anthony Blunt were elected, the membership was mainly Marxist. So the membership of the Cambridge Apostles in the 1930s was mainly Marxist. Documents from the Soviet archives included in the book The Crown Jewels by Nigel West and Oleg Tsarov. I believe I quoted from Nigel West The Crown Jewels when I was finding connections between KGB and Thomas Harrison, was it?
Huh. And wasn't there this little thing where like Sakun Loeb, Marxism, Soviet Union, Tartary, massacre of 70 million Russians. Never mind. Go on.
So he indicates that it was Burgess who seduced and led Blunt into the Soviet underground. As the Queen's art advisor, Blunt was knighted in 1956, but was stripped of his knighthood in 1979 after Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher publicly named him as a spy, his confession having been kept secret before then. So that's the Cambridge Apostles spy ring. So let's go back up again to Walter Leaf, president of the Hellenic Society. He was married to Charlotte Simmons, whose father was John Addington Simmons, and he's pretty important to the study as well. So John Addington Simmons was father-in-law to Walter Leaf, president of the Hellenic Societies. So John Simmons was an English poet and literary critic, a cultural historian. He was known for his work on the Renaissance, around the time when Scaliger's alive, and Michelangelo, as well as numerous biographies of writers and artists. Although he married and had a family, he was an early advocate of male love, or homosexuality, which he believed could include pederastic as well as egalitarian relationships.
He sounds like Peter Lamborn Wilson, a long time ago.
Yeah, he's right up there with him. Referring to it as l'amour de l'impossible.
I wonder if that's who raised Peter Lamborn Wilson. Hakim Bey. Maybe that's where Peter got his boy love early on.
Might have been an influence to him, and as we'll see a little bit further on, he wrote a book about this. So he also wrote much poetry inspired by his homosexual affairs. And again, he's referring to the pederastic love as the love of the impossible. We need to really, really, really focus on that. The guy is a sicko.
Well, and then we see the promotion of all the pederasty and whatnot in the media these days. Never mind. I mean, nothing to see here, folks. Skip along.
So homosexuality and homosexual writings of Simmons. In 1873, Simmons wrote A Problem in Greek Ethics, a work of what would later be called gay history. He was inspired by the poetry of Walt Whitman, with whom he corresponded. The work, quote, perhaps the most exhaustive eulogy of Greek love, end quote, remained unpublished for a decade, and then was printed at first only in a limited edition for a private distribution. I love that quote didn't actually.
Dude, I got a Walt Whitman Rostow tied to the OSS.
So Walt Whitman, as in the middle name Whitman.
Yeah. So like a son or nephew or something of a
Or just a fun way of somebody who was a supposed fan of his poetry might have just named them. They're like, oh, let's name him Walter. Well, let's just make him Walter Whitman. But
that would be a child. So why would they be into homosexual poetry?
Yeah, especially reading some of his poems. I remember when I was an English major in college, and I can't remember the specific poem, but it was considered risque for his observations of boys swimming in a lake. I can't remember the name of the poem off the top of my head, though. That was a long time ago. I should look that up. So, although the Oxford English Dictionary credits the medical writer C.G. Chaddock for introducing homosexual into the English language in 1892, Simmons had already used the word in A Problem in Greek Ethics. Aware of the taboo nature of his subject matter, Simmons referred obliquely to pederasty as, quote, the unmentionable custom, end quote, in a letter to a prospective reader of the book, but defined, quote, Greek love in the essay itself as a passionate and enthusiastic attachment subsisting between man and youth.
So wait a second. I got to get something straight here. So the pedophiles and homosexuals use manufactured ancient Greek history to substantiate their
claims.
Oh.
Yeah. But I mean,
so because you always hear that, well, we should have, pedophilia because the Greeks had it. I mean, that's what you hear them argue all the time, right? I mean, if the Greeks did it, it must be good, it's like that's one of their biggest arguments.
And they always kind of qualify it with something that Simmons says right here, but as a passionate and enthusiastic attachment subsisting between man and youth, recognized by society and protected by opinion, which, though is not free from sensuality, did not degenerate into mere licentiousness. So they were sensual, but it wasn't like totally erotic, dirty stuff. It was just, a relationship between a man and a youth.
Oh, yeah. So,
sensual,
because,
but it wasn't
right, because, the parents and normal people who would have the child's best interests in mind to bring them up righteously, that's not important. We need, pedophiles to do that, and get some boy love going on.
Yeah, some of that's a weird kind of mentorship protege kind of a situation going on there.
Right.
So Simmons studied. I'm sorry?
You know what? It reminded me of. I'll let Robert cover that one. I'm not going to give out all of Robert's stuff.
No, you should let him have some fun with it.
Yeah.
So Simmons studied classics under Benjamin Jowett. Oh boy, so at Balliol College, Oxford, and later worked with Jowett on an English translation of Plato's Symposium. Jowett was critical of Simmons' opinions on sexuality, but when Simmons was falsely accused of corrupting choir boys, Jowett supported him, despite his own equivocal views of the relation of Hellenism to contemporary legal and social issues that affected homosexuals. So Benjamin Jowett, when I heard that name, it was like lightning in my head. Where did that name come from? Well, another famous student of Benjamin Jowett's is none other than Alfred Milner, first Viscount Milner, the principal author of the Balfour Declaration, a public statement issued by the British government during World War I, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a minority Jewish population. So, indeed, if we go back to Walter Lee for a moment, we will see that he is a member of the Society for Psychical Research. Frank Podmore.
So all of their psychical research is to get people to accept their pederasty and.
Well, that's what it is. It's getting even weirder. So indeed, if we go back to Walter Lee for a moment, we will see that he's a member of the Society for Psychical Research. Frank Podmore, a founder of the Fabian Society, was also a member. Arthur Balfour, fellow of the British Academy and namesake to the Balfour Declaration, was a president of the society. Its stated purpose is to understand events and abilities commonly described as psychic or paranormal. It describes itself as the, quote, first society to conduct organized scholarly research into human experiences that challenge contemporary scientific models.
In other words, we got to bugger children and see what the results are.
Well, is that really a psychical research that was, well, I guess it's associated with people that have a lot of those.
Well, because what they do is they cause the trauma, and then they can go back later on and study the people and then go, oh, look, this is, wonderful. Look how screwed up with this person is in their 30s that I diddled when he was 3, Yeah,
it wasn't his crazy uncle. It was an alien.
Wow. It's amazing that they've gotten away with all of this for... now we're actually seeing the origins of it. And it's really interesting too, because the Catholic Church here and the banning of marriage with Catholic priests, because fathers in the church were actually supposed to be real fathers, like with children, and then what they did was they got rid of the fathers and they brought in pedophiles that weren't actual parents, that didn't have any investment in the provide and protect aspects of a proper alpha leadership role in the church like that.
Indeed. I mean, we've to take the father and almost like invert it to the point where they aren't really in that
Well,
role.
it's a complete inversion and perversion of the role of the priest father in the church for, teaching truth and guidance, right? They totally inverted it.
Oh man, yeah, and it's like we should probably, if anyone wants to see the inversion, go back to Scaliger Part 3 because you're going to see more of it. I mean, just the amount that we've exposed there was insane, and we're coming right back to it again. And we're looking at Frank Podmore, the founder of the Fabian Society, working with Walter Leaf as president of the Society of Psychical Research, creating a book entitled "Phantasms of the Living" concerning telepathy and apparitions, co-authored by Gurney and Myers, as well as Frank Podmore. So this is like the foundation text for that society. It's let's see here. This text and subsequent research in this area was received negatively by the scientific mainstream, though Gurney and Podmore provided defense of the society's early work in this area in mainstream publications. Now we're kind of closing it out right here.
Kind of. It looks like you're on the last paragraph, dude, just so you know.
Yeah,
you're kind of out of notes there. I'm just pointing out.
So, returning to John Simmons and his daughter, the wife of Hellenic Society president Walter Leaf. So Simmons's daughter, Madge Vaughn, was probably writer Virginia Woolf's first same-sex crush, though there is no evidence that the feeling was mutual. Woolf was the cousin of her husband, William Weimar Vaughn. Another daughter, Charlotte Simmons, married the classicist Walter Leaf. So here we are tying the apostles back into each other all over again. We have Virginia Woolf crushing on Walter Leaf's, sister-in-law, who is the daughter of John Addington Simmons, who is homosexual and a proponent of pedophilia.
Huh. And Marxism, ironically.
Marxism and classical research.
What is it about Marxism and pedophilia and all that seems to go together, I wonder? I probably know more but there definitely seems to be some ties there. I guess, once you take one step into Satanism, it does, they just kind of run all the way to the end,
It's a disgusting sticky hole to dive into, man.
Because, Marxism is the denial of the laws of nature and logos to, give government the most power rather than the family. So, now we can see this whole thing as the attack on the family, and you can take it from the horde all the way to the extended family, to the nuclear family, and now to the, the single mother living on welfare, right?
Exactly. We have so many different nodes tying together through this research. You got the Fabian Society, the academies. You have, I think in some of my past research, there was this library. What was it called again? I'm blanking off the top of my head, but it's where the 100 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade was supposedly rediscovered. We talk about that in Scaliger Part 3. There's like such a weird subversion of the intellect and the education and the purity of what it means to be, a member of mankind.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's complete degeneration.
And it's normalizing the degeneration so that people don't even know what truth is anymore. In fact, they will argue, I see it every day, that people argue that truth doesn't even exist. 1 + 1 isn't 2, and then they'll take that from a truth to the truth, and you can't know the truth. You can't come to terms with logos. You can't understand what the adversary, the antithesis is. You can't, you can't know these things they want us to all believe. So they've created this ultimate slave system based on sex, drugs, rock and roll, pedophilia, and the whole shebang. But I feel like, we're finally getting down to the core of what makes these societies and organizations tick that we've been exposing since, at least 2012 now, pretty heavily. So I think now we're finally at the kernel of it, so that the people who have ventured this far through the 900 hours of shows or whatever, starting when I thought psychedelics were great to, to today, and seeing this whole progression that they sold to destroy, wipe out, dumb down society and sell this whole agenda. Now we can see it all the way back from Scaliger to, to the present, right up to, today's DCI of the CIA.
It's a complete inversion.
Well, now we've inverted their inversions, so now I guess maybe the CIA is inept and no longer competent. I mean, now the great secret has been exposed. Well, there's still at least one more episode of the series, so I don't want to give it all away. But
yeah, it would not necessarily expose. Whenever I think that I'm coming to the conclusion, or arriving to the conclusion, I find like 600 more leads. Each of these presentations probably about 15 to 25 pages each.
So
I probably cut probably about 200 to 300 pages of notes out of these.
We have to thank the request for someone in the public to research Coconut Moon, because without that request, we wouldn't have been, we wouldn't have had Jacob's help to, peel the last layers of the onion apart here and expose, the rest of it for all of mankind to see this freaking ridiculous fraud, and it's good to see these Loeb classics debunked that so many clowns go around citing, etc., as the next great thing. I mean, people just cite this stuff without even considering the veracity. So,
or even like reading the introduction and seeing what the sources are coming from. It's right there in the introduction. They're telling you what it is. You just got to read it. Yeah. And then you realize, oh, if this isn't a primary source, this is a secondary source that I'm reading from. And
yeah, it's amazing the incompetence that passes off as like learned scholarship these days. I mean, I see it rampant within professorships as well, throughout academia. And using the trivium, you can tackle just about any field of study and get down underneath it and expose it as a fraud in no time. You discover these cells and all of these so-called doctors, et cetera, professors citing each other, and you get down into the primaries and nothing ever checks out. It's the same thing. So, I've shown it with ethnobotany, with spies in academic clothing. You're showing it again, how people can go in and, you didn't just debunk like, history right there. I mean, how many professors and scholars and academics have been proven incompetent or complicit in this cover-up just in this one series?
Well, it seems like people almost want to join the narrative and they want to continue it on because they feel there's so much that they can tie on and associate to. With the foundations of Western civilization, we can't really know where it comes from before the 14 or 1300s. And so you have to use the trivium to examine those texts and see where those sources are coming from and who's controlling them. It's not just it's who, what, where, when, why, and how. You have to go through every single one of them as we dive down. It's kind of like you take a drill. You look at a drill and how it operates when you drill into a piece of wood.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the symbol of the trivium is that too.
You got the whole piece of wood right there. You put your drill on top, and as you dig down into the source, the drill is pulling up information to you. So there's a double motion that's going there, and you're just going down and you're pulling that information out. You go down, you pull the information out, you go down. It's just back and forth. You have to keep doing it.
I'm actually showing an image on screen, or a couple of them here, so to try and help illustrate the point. Someone made these images for me years ago to try to describe this, and how it works. But it's here we go. Here's a better one.
It's like when you're using the trivium, and what I really like about this show is there's many ways of utilizing. You can go back and you can study history and check sources and either verify or cancel them out. But not only that, but you can take research of modern medicine that's going on right now, and you can either verify it or show it as false. And we have a lot of guests on the show that have done that as well. And it's important because we need to know the things that are working as well. Not just things that aren't working. We need to know what works and take that stuff and apply
Well,
it.
the same banking families created the modern medical industry
Exactly.
as well,
It needs to be examined closely and exposed or
So,
verified.
you know, and then we see Marshall McLuhan taking and inverting the trivium with his, with his nonsense, and you see other groups out there constantly, trying to cherry pick the history of the trivium and what it is, trying to say, oh well, it's going to lead to, it leads to like a properly structured society and rational thinking and such. That's bad, So, I mean,
I still think it's bad, but
yeah, well, I'm not sure how it's bad either. Or there's a kink at the end of it that makes you believe in, that logos is true and that, Darwin and Huxley weren't correct. Even though we exposed Darwin and Huxley 5-6 years ago. So repeatedly. And yet people still want to tout that crap. Biohistory, whatever the hell they call that crap now. But
yeah, it'd be nice to have somebody examine Charles Darwin's work on biology and look into it and actually give a nice show about it.
Have you ever thought, because the lightning bolt strikes. I mean, and life crawls out of the primordial mud. But since life eats other life, how many life forms crawled out all at the exact same instant to feed the other life forms? Like, it's like, grant me one miracle, the Big Bang from the black hole, the Big Bang from the black hole, right? and then you come up with like the Big Bang black hole theory and Darwin and Huxley and all of these, Scaliger, Bernays, Freud, fraud, all of these people, Wasson, etc., promoting this whole, banging the black hole stuff. So, I guess the cat's out of the bag,
It's quite the journey. It's pretty exhausting too. I mean, if those of you out there who appreciate the work that I've been doing to put
donate to this guy, please.
Please
send, help him buy the next couple $1,000s worth of books, because some of these books behind him are like 300, 400, 500 plus each.
Yeah, some of them are quite expensive. So
each,
all of them are 300 or 500 bucks, but a few of them are quite expensive, especially the older books like the General Dictionary, Historical and Critical by Thomas Birch. Very expensive.
So, and please support Gnostic Media too. In the holiday season, times are tough. Any extra donations for both of us? Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of that. Hopefully, we can get you back on soon. I do want to wrap this up as soon as we can. And I mentioned to you that we have some really interesting ideas and directions for the show in the future, and just taking things to a whole new level, ascending beyond their bullshit.
It'll be fun to see. Can't wait.
Yeah. Anyway,
if anyone would like to see me do more work, I mean, it's exhausting. It's time consuming. Work a job.
Yes, send Jacob like a $3,000 donation. We'll see how much faster he gets the work done between. I mean, like, it's like me too. It's like people complain you're not cranking out shows fast enough. It's like, well, there's the donate button. I got to go do all of this other stuff and keep everything organized. The more you donate, the more it helps.
It's a value for value model. If you value the research that we do, please send the value you.
Thank you. You know what? How many times I've heard thousands of times in the almost 9.5 years I've done this show, people tell me that I've gotten more education out of this show than my 4, 6, 8-year university education, but yet nobody has ever donated to me even the equivalent of one semester's worth of their university, tuition. So please donate, support. Please realize that, we've dug down into this. Use the Trivium method. We gave it to you. Gene brought it out 9 years ago, 8 years ago, for us to be able to do this so that we can see all of this.
Thank you, Gene.
And thank you, Gene. Thank you, everybody, for supporting the show. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Anyway, any final? That sounds so final. Anything you'd like to add before we end the show for the night?
If you would like to contact me, you can reach me, and I'm already losing my voice. You could reach me at jacobduellman@gmail.com. JACOBDUELLMAN. And from there, we can have a little conversation. And if you have any donations you'd like to send to me, I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and I hope everybody is looking forward to a great 2018.
Go drink some buttered coffee. It'll help the throat a lot. That just really helped a lot. Anyway,
it's too late. Honey. It's
honey time.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, Jacob. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for participating. We'll see you hopefully next week. If we don't have any cars taking out the power line outside and massive flues and stuff. So hopefully see you next week. Take care.